But thank you for joining in. I'm Anshika Verma, and oops, I think we have lost them for a tiny.
You're here.
Oh, they're there. Okay, we're back. Okay, cool. I'm Anshika. I'm the founder of Offset Projects, and Offset is an initiative I started a couple of years ago, which has just become a platform for me to try and experiment with different ideas and educational platforms for looking at artist books. And we've unfortunately been more focused on photography books for a while, but I thought that this was a good chance for us to break out and expand our own knowledge and conversations into more of the visual based book formats. And a friend of ours, actually, Virangana, who has also joined in. Hi, V.
Hi, V.
She happened to introduce the two of us, and then I also got to know that Vishwa was a chef. Thanks, V, for that little inside note on it. And I was immediately intrigued, and I was like, okay, I want to know everything that you're doing. But as I got to know later, there's many other facets to Vishwa and Goto, and we'll actually get started on them right now. Hi guys.
Hi again, and thanks everyone for joining us in spite of these rather apocalyptic times, or probably because of them. But anyway, thanks for coming in. Thanks, V, for this introduction. I can't wait to meet Anushka in person. We've had such wonderful telephonic conversations. And thank you to Offset Projects for inviting us to do this.
No, it's a blast to have you guys here. So what I'm actually going to do is maybe, Goto, it would be nice to start with you maybe, and just to get a sense of like, so I know that your practice has been more architecture based, but it's also looking at certain aspects of architecture within human life and social structures. And I mean, you know, we were having this conversation today where you said that architecture is the built environment, you know, in which we live, and so it's as important and it impacts us probably as much into the people that we, you know, end up being. And it would be, I was just curious to know that what your interests within architecture as a creative expression have been.
It's starting with
with a big question.
Yes, I think it's my interest in architecture is something that's of course, like in 20th century, 21st century now we are living. The built environment we have is kind of quite developed, and then the city that we live in is already built, and seemingly it's saturated. And many of them, when I work, when I confront sometimes client, confront the person who have a concern about architecture, built environment, there are lots of knowledge and it already exists, and then people practice from the household practice to how you kind of maintain your public space, clean or communal space within the neighborhood.
Right.
And my kind of interest in working in architectural field is that it's to kind of question and update these environment and the knowledge. Right. So there's a lot of still place to work, and the architecture, unfortunately, compared to IT and another industry, it's quite slow process.
Right.
And so that's the kind of my interest, but it's fortunately architecture that we can always work together with people.
Right. Right.
So that's my interest.
Thank you.
I should tell you this one. As a teenager, Goto thought that he might want to be a surgeon or a
Oh.
doctor, and then he thought,
dentist.
oh,
Put the
dentist,
dentist as well.
Okay.
and then
A lawyer.
and lawyer, and then he
Wow.
thought, well, if I become one of those, then only people will only come to me with their problems. But if I become an architect, then happy people will come to me. That's why he is an architect.
Yeah, in fact, it seems I make those people unhappy because my buildings sometimes leak.
Well, but you're happy by the
leak,
end
but
of
it's
it,
like
right?
architecture usually leak. And
Our
it's
house
cracked.
leaks.
Yeah, cracks and then always maintenance. People think that it's when it's built new, it's the best condition. So every time I call the client called me back and they're saying that there's this problem, that problem. So it seems I'm creating a problem.
It's good to create problems once in a while. You're making sure people don't get too complacent also. It's fine, I think. Right, Vishwa?
Yeah.
So let's just for the people who are joining us and who might not know much about both the practices that we're going to kind of discuss to a certain degree, maybe. Vishwa, how do I begin to describe? So there's the culinary aspect with chef training, of course, and then
That's something I don't really practice anymore, except for myself getting a bit chubbier. But so I actually was very adamant to be an artist, and I started out wanting to be a potter, and then once I was in college, it was kind of like, oh, but I enjoy drawing so much more. So I didn't do pottery, I did painting instead. But then after my MA was a bit lost. I was like, now what? Those nice, lovely weekly crits stopped coming. And then I was a bit lost for a while. Decided to be a chef, worked as a chef for a while. It was kind of that moment, probably like if you can't make bread, if you can't eat bread, eat cake, that kind of
right.
moment in my life. Anyway, and then while working as a chef, really missed drawing, missed kind of thinking about things, because no offense to chefs, but it is a very repetitive kind of, especially at that lowly level of chef, when you're just starting out. And I was kind of missing my head a bit. And so I came back to painting without really knowing what to draw. It was kind of this moment like, oh, okay, I'm quitting this, but I don't know how to get myself started on this. But somehow it's worked out. So far, so good.
Right. and we have found many things to say, and in my case, I guess, to read from the works that you create. So I think it's on a good journey, right? And so you did mention when you started drawing and then you came back to it. And I was curious to know, in that going back, because there was, of course, a few years or a phase, that changed a whole lot of things in how you were looking at maybe the world also to a certain degree. And so when you went back into drawing, was there a difference in how you were approaching your own thoughts or your own concepts to a certain degree?
It was, for me, coming back to it was like starting anew. I started also with very little confidence that I could actually draw anymore, because it had been about 4 years. And, so for a long time, I just drew blades of grass because I didn't know if I could even do it again. So it was really like, for me, coming back to it was retraining. And I must really thank all my professors from MSU, to actually almost allow me that time again from them to be able to retrain myself. So in conversation with them, kind of came back to it in the very, as if I was doing a BA again, but like doing it informally.
Right. And so how did the collaborative elements then begin, with you guys?
So as I was saying, I came back with not much in terms of material or no, like, oh, I want to say this to the world or none of that. I really didn't know what I was doing. And I was working entirely in my sketchbook. Very afraid to actually get out of that kind of comfort zone or to show it to anyone or any of that. And my lovely, lovely professor, B.V. Suresh, sent me this little email forward one day, which was about a project by Akron University called Monumental Ideas in Miniature Books. And he called me and he said, look, you've got these drawings that you've been doing in your sketchbook. Mm-hmm. Here is something that you can possibly consider participating in. That is still the format of a book, but it will allow you some play and see what you can do with it. And I thought to myself, well, if Suresh has said it, I must do something. I cannot ignore this. Right. But I did it. Like I said, I never made a book before. I'd never, and by this time, Goto and I had been playing around a lot. We'd been making like funny paper mache masks and all sorts of origami and all of that. And so I kind of ran to him. I was like, hey, you want to do this together? Like, hey, shall we have some fun? Like, it might not work out. And in that case, we don't submit, but let's see.
Right.
So then I don't know how it came to for Goto.
No, you brought that project. So
he's like, I was not left with much of a choice. You came and said, this is it. Right. And maybe
you could have said no. You could have been like,
probably I just at that time I needed to perform as Japanese. Okay, you come from Japan. There's all the like intricate like publication in the world, looking at Japanese book making. Okay, so I will show some Japanness within me.
Japan.
It was way too Gujarati to qualify as Japanese.
Oh no. Maybe what I can do is should I open a room for the attendees then, and should we talk from there, or should we start with postulating? What would you prefer?
Let's start with room.
Perfect. Okay, so
I'll just say this: that was not the first book we made. That was in fact the fourth
collaboration. Right? Yeah. So I'm just gonna open this PDF, and then maybe we can also later show some photographs that you shared, which are on your you shared with me earlier, just so people get a sense of what the book was actually like as well to hold. But so this is the collaboration that you were talking about in terms of the miniature work as well, right?
Yes. So this was, we did one MIMB, Monumental Ideas and Miniature Books. And that one was called Fragment. And then I think 2 years later or 3 years later, there was another MIMB call out, and then we decided to participate one more time.
Right.
So this is the second.
So this is the second one for MIMB, but the fourth book in terms of what we've done.
Okay. And with Room, do you want to talk about what the thought process was? Because I mean, of course, there's the architectural aspect that comes into the into the structures of how they play, and that sense of the slowness of time, Goto, that you had mentioned. That architecture also, it's a much slower process.
Slow in terms of kind of innovation is very slow.
Innovation, yeah. But I mean, I think even the book has a rhythm of it that kind of you're in one place, and then there's just smaller movements that keep happening within it. Almost slightly voyeuristic, of course, as well. So, I was just curious to know what got this idea going for you guys.
So to start with, MIMB had a mandate of size, which is that it needed to be 4 inches by 5 inches by 1 inch. So kind of interesting size to work with. And
right.
By this time, I was questioning how narrative works. And I was kind of interested in seeing if I could tell a story without actually having a protagonist in it. So, and I was also kind of looking at household objects or objects we use as a as markers of our lives.
Hmm.
Like, you know, when you walk into somebody's house and you look at their stuff and you make a lot of judgment. Sorry, I sound terrible as a person saying that.
No, not at all.
But you
You
kind
sound
of,
honest about it, at least. We all do that.
yeah, no, like, you know, you can, like, to say judgment is wrong, but you kind of have a tendency to infer to a few things. Like, if you walked into a terribly messy house, you kind of, if you are especially OCD like I am, you instantly don't like that person very much. You
You
know, they
make an
might,
assumption about what that person is going to do.
exactly. And that, I was wondering if there was a story that was made up purely of objects, you know, could you still extract a narrative from it? Like if you never saw the person that this room belongs to. Goto's approach was very different. So
Yes, my approach was something to do with like physical space.
Right.
So this room book is simply cutting the paper, cut in a way that is carve out the paper, stack of paper,
Right.
and create the one space.
Mm-hmm.
So right now you are seeing the mezzanine level with
Right.
one single bed, but
Mm-hmm.
as you go forward, and there's going to be a downstairs space with a desk and a bathroom. So,
Right.
so I think to me it was important to create the staircase, which is one of the dynamic element in architecture.
Right.
This case also, it's not really dynamic, but it kind of gives you understanding of spaces.
Right.
So now cutting through
Now
the
we'll,
slab and then yeah, the space below. Um, so it's a kind of space compressed within the book.
and so it's, and the book in itself also is kind of has this three-dimensionality to it, as an object as well, you know, in the ways that it was constructed, I would say, maybe over here. And so maybe it might be also interesting to talk about how you came up with that structure. I mean, of course there was the limitation of the size that was mandated, you know, and that I'm sure allowed its own dynamics into how you built a house inside a book. um, but also the you know, like how you had a magnifying glass and other elements that you brought in to kind of exaggerate on the idea of participation, but also the idea of voyeurism within the book. That was quite interesting to me as well.
I think it's one thing that we need to mention is that there's a time factor in this uh, book. So, I'm sure you can maybe
Maybe
it's essentially it's 18 years.
18 years of time going from the topmost, like the beginning of the book,
right,
and by the time it ends, it's 18 years past.
right,
The drawing which is made, and then the space imagines like a medical CT scan. You kind of slicing the room from the top to bottom. Yes, like this.
I'm just
But,
I'm
but
going to
it's
try and
not
get
kind
the
of
images.
time is also at the same time as you go down. It
Mhm.
goes like it's going through the 18 years.
So as you're moving through the pages of the book, you're also traveling in time with that site, let's just say. Would that make sense?
Yes, with the protagonist. So the imagined story is of a girl
Mm-hmm.
who the beginning is imagined as she's just been gotten home from hospital, she's just born, and then it ends with her leaving for university. So it's 18 years of this girl's life told through objects.
I'm just, yeah, I think this might help with explaining the different levels and the time frame that you talked about. I'm just sharing that image. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay.
So very tiny, you can't see objects, but
Yeah, you can't see that.
Yeah, the objects are really tiny inside. But I mean, it would be interesting to talk about how you also decided on the persona of this protagonist, that the protagonist who you don't see, but yet you see everything connected to her life over a period of time.
Essentially, it's me.
It's almost Vishwa.
It's almost
Okay.
it's almost me, but it's not exactly autobiographical. It's also we had very fun moments while doing it. So, for example, I know nothing about children. And then I had this entire time span, that we've gotten this kid from hospital with nothing. So I called one of my cousins up. I called her up and I said, "Look, you've just had a baby. Tell me what you need." And she was actually quite pissed off with me because she thought I was pregnant, and she was like, "How can you do this? Of course, at this time, Goto and I were not really, we were together, but we were not married or anything." She was like, "How can you do this?" I was like, "Hold on, just tell me the objects. It's for a project. I'm not pregnant." So there were these moments where we would also call friends and cousins and ask them about their children and what they are doing, or
Right.
the kind of objects that they use. Because I am not very clear, and most of us are not very clear on the first 5-6 years of our life. So we don't remember,
Right.
except like some very special toy or something. You don't quite remember what all you had. So it's also a little bit like ambitious. So somewhere in the middle of all of this, she has a rotring set, which as a teenager, if I had a I mean, I am jealous of her. Like
Of
my
this
teenage
teenager.
self is already jealous of this kid.
Right. This kid is clearly getting everything that she had wanted in her room and outside of it seems, right?
Yes. And I think it also includes, things that were aspirational, like looking back in time and things that were aspirational to me that I may or may not have had. So I remember like have this pink bicycle that I always wanted, which I never had, but then this little girl has it. And so
Right.
in that sense, it's kind of slippages of things that one remembers as objects. It's a lot of also searching of what girls do and then what I want this girl to be doing, because I didn't want her to be like a girly girl. So
Yeah, you didn't want her to be doing the other regular stuff, like, right. And Goto, when you were creating the architecture for this book, what are the elements that, I mean, were you particular about certain things that you wanted? Like you mentioned that the staircase was really important for you to connect the beginning towards, the next. I mean, in some ways, you're also talking about this girl kind of moving outside of the room and, occupying a home in some ways, and then she moves out of it, which also then, so the architecture begins to kind of collapse, in that sense also. And I mean, I'm just curious to know, how were you approaching the three-dimensionality of that onto this varied dimensionality, let's just say, within the book?
Yes, the one thing that it was the challenging was in architectural drawing, when we kind of make a horizontal section, we call it plan.
Right.
Yeah, that you kind of see the building from the top like this,
right,
the whole room from the top. And then usually we don't use the Enio perspective.
right.
So you don't see the side of the wall because it's kind of with
Yeah.
parallel projection you don't see. But this case we thought that it might be interesting to have perspective. That's also kind of giving the notion of like single point of view, which is this matches with the one single person occupying the space.
Okay.
So that was kind of challenging. But it's what is in the room in terms of furniture, except the kind of staircase and bathroom, and then a little bit of personal space, and then upstairs there's a bed. Other than that, it's like a little furniture is kind of inconsequent. We could just did it with any, yeah.
It could be anything else also instead of.
Yes.
Yes.
So
Okay.
in fact, it's like a retrospectively what that little bit of personal space is quite important, because this room is obviously not the entire family's home. It's not
Right.
her room. She
Right.
has another living room with parents. She
Mhm.
probably had another dining kitchen and all that. It's the where that's like an entire family lives.
Right.
And but it's, we only featured this one single, like her personal room.
Right. And actually that is something that I found it sorry, interesting as well, was this idea of kind of wanting to navigate into personal spaces, which I know that's something that you've also followed on with your other works, even outside of the book form. And so it seems like this sense of like wanting to know what's happening inside private rooms is almost like a permanent curiosity in some ways, right?
Eventually, I want to be a peeping Tom. That's what it is.
Okay, and we get to live it through this world then. But I mean, since we're talking about the working with dimensionalities, I mean, I also thought it might be a nice time to bring in postulating premises, which is the next book that I think you guys had worked on together after.
But just one small thing before we jump to postulating premises. And I really want to say this for two reasons. One is because, nothing that I feel like nothing that we do comes from nothing. I mean, it's not like, sudden innovation came.
Right.
And also for anybody else who wants to use these references. So Olafur Ellison had done a book of his own house, which is cut in section. Very beautiful book.
It is very beautiful.
It's a very big book as well. And the other one is that Japanese travel writer's book, in which he travels to India, and he has drawn every single room that he ever stayed in, whether it is a hotel room or a hostel room or any of that, in this kind of single point perspective, but looking from a bird's eye point of view. So an extremely beautifully illustrated book, if you can tell the name.
Should I get it? We have one.
That would be really nice if you can share it maybe.
The problem is finding it.
Oh no, then it's okay. Then it's fine. You can send it.
I had this master stroke one day that I will arrange my library.
Has this lockdown helped you do that?
No, we did it much before the lockdown. The thing is that we labeled everything and then arranged it according to labels. And now we don't know what our labels are. So we have to search a catalog of our own house. Yeah, but this is the book.
But then
Maybe. Oh, we can just do it like
yeah,
this.
but the camera is small.
Oh yeah, we can see normal camera. Oh, okay. That's quite interesting.
So very much referencing this way of drawing as well.
Right. And what timeline did you say this was? When was this book?
It was
2011.
2011. Okay. Okay. Cool.
Yeah,
And
because you were saying, sorry, I just also need to add, if you notice that it's room book, we also drawn outside. That was very important. We didn't really have a narrative outside, but it's the one single room without relation to the outside. So where the parents live, where this room belongs to another bigger family, or even outside, there's a cat on the roof.
Yeah, and the pigeons that keep coming.
That was also, to us, it's in terms of looking at the structure of the room, in relation to the outside is quite important.
Right, right. And I think that's why also the other dynamics of when the balcony comes into play, suddenly, you're moving into a different stage as well, even within the house. And I mean, in fact, it's taken me back to a conversation that we were having that I've seen in both postulating premises and in Room, was this idea of repeated pattern building that happens, whether it's habituated within architecture or human personalities, but exhibited through how we work with objects that, you know, become part of our lives. And so there's almost like this repeat pattern visual that's working through it, that's kind of going further and further into the life of the individual who, like you said, Vishwa, one cannot even see. And maybe I'll just share the screen for postulating premises also. Just a second, not this one. Oops, sorry, one sec. I'm trying to see if I can.
Third tab.
Third tab from the right.
Third tab. Oh.
No,
Yes.
no, not that one.
Oh.
Your tab.
Ah, thank you. Yes, because I couldn't see. I had this one. Right.
Yes.
I had the you are screen sharing tab all over it. But so we'll start with postulating premises. And even within this, we're kind of working with understanding an individual maybe, or a set or a system, but through objects. And again, the individual is outside of this conversation in some ways, physically outside of this conversation as well, right? Do you want to just share the process with postulating as well?
Should I go first? So, postulating happened in 2015.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, 2015. And by this time we were, by this time we were living in Tokyo. We'd moved to Tokyo 2 years before we made this book. And a lot of my practice is kind of, or at least in my head, it is kind of going out for walks and looking at things and being a peeping Tom and being voyeuristic and kind of asking myself the stories that can potentially come out of these objects. And in Tokyo, very much like in Bombay, the window plays a very important role. Like the window is really the thing that you encounter. Also the scale of the houses in our neighborhood where I was walking a lot is lovely. It's my scale. I'm a very short person. So, you know, to encounter something at my eye level excites me a lot. And something that, you know, I really have a fight with every curator, and I really want to tell museums to hang things slightly lower, but that's a different story.
Yeah.
Coming back to
I get you on that completely.
In our neighborhood in Japan, the windows were really my eye level, and that made it very attractive to me. And I look at them as, you know, thresholds of not quite certain which side you're on. And I always think of window as something where the inside and the outside can be reversed, or in fact can also be infinite. Like the process of an inside and an outside can be infinite. So with postulating, I wanted to explore how this infinity of windows can potentially tell the story of what is within it. Because that's the other question. I never actually went into any of these houses. I never knew the people who lived there. And it's just an assumption of what is behind these windows, or the narratives are completely in my own headspace, right? So for me, the window became literally like a little TV screen of assuming what is behind it.
Right.
Like a frame within which a narrative or a space, an assumed space exists. And what that might be is the game I'm playing in my head.
So for me, it's obviously it's about space.
Right.
But it's also that it's the how architecture is kind of produced. In this case, that it's more specifically for housing. And when I moved back to Tokyo, full time I'm working as an architect, and for the survival in Japan as an architect, the most of the case that the project that you have is making a private house, not even housing.
Right.
And then private house that you design for is usually for the people who are, again, happy and they are like newly married or not even newly married, kind of next stages of their the life, like as a couple.
Right.
Probably, one kid is born and kid become like 6'5" now. Soon they need another, individual room of their own, and etc. So it's kind of a happy situation. But as I was always find it difficult, because why we only design for those people who are happy? Why not we don't confront the people who has illness or some struggle in the life? Why not take not family but homosexuality and none of those that we have. So the postulating premises that it's a kind of juxtaposition of this single room with, again, that's one point perspective seen from the side. And there's a Victorian house to Japanese typical tatami mats. One of them a hospital room. Could be one of them modernist building, interpreted and fitted in this format. But and the furniture depicts the non-family furniture. So we have a bunk bed placed in multiple bunk bed placed in a room, or even pigeonhole, water server, which usually you don't have it in your home, but obviously these days people have.
At least at the rate one sees those bottles and everything that they have.
Newspaper holder. Those are not the
like
elements.
Institutional newspaper holder. No? Like at home we have a little neat basket. You don't have one of those ugly ones on the wall with. It was also kind of choosing objects which are institutional in a way.
Right.
Not necessarily. In fact, it's like my problem was these. Suppose look at the old age home. Their usual punchline that we take care of you as if we are family.
Right.
No. I'm old now and I'm by myself. I would like to enjoy my life. I don't really need family,
Right. The whole
setup. Yeah, I don't need a family. I want to be an individual. Why not go that way?
Right, as opposed to being the traditional format of like, oh, now you're old and we must take care of you. And
why that it's family home is always like you are taking care.
Right.
It's kind of, there's no question there.
Right. No, that's actually, I mean, it's quite interesting that you put that, because it's so true. With a lot of old age recreational homes or even otherwise that are there, and it's quite interesting how, I mean, I don't know what it's like in Japan, to be very honest, because I don't know much about the
Can I
social.
please sum this one up? I cannot resist this. Near our house, there is a old age home facility, which is called Alive. They've named it Alive.
Where is this? I'm sorry.
In Tokyo, near our house, there's an old age facility which is called Alive. How sad is
What
that?
is that?
What are you trying to tell these people, that you just be happy to be alive? Like it's called Alive.
That's very sad. I'm sorry. That's not being alive.
When I saw it, I was both rolling on the floor laughing and really sad at the same time. I was like, why is it called Alive?
Oh God, but did you guys go in by any chance?
No, we didn't.
Did you peek in from the window, Vishwa? Come on.
Yes. I even have photographs of the window, and I'm not sure, but one of the windows in postulating premises might be
alive.
Alive.
Oh, wow. Well, yeah, it's such a fact that, I mean, you don't think about it as much. I mean, I haven't had to think about it as much up until now, but I think it's an important process to see how they work their interiors to make you alive or not so, or like dependent. individual. Uh, and I guess in so many ways, all domestic spaces have that kind of dynamic, right? Because you're trying to you're trying to adapt them to become part of the individual as well. And I know that this is something that Goto, you were also interested in as far as architecture is concerned. You know, the idea of how architecture is personalized for the individual, but also how it impacts it the other way around, round too. And I mean, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, you know, what you were saying is that how we create or how the architecture that we surround ourselves with impacts our sense of social structure as well. You know, and I thought it might be interesting to talk about that in context to, I'm I'm taking a leap over here because I'm realizing we've spent a little bit of time talking about this. But I really wanted to talk to you about how libraries and social structures connect for you, because I know that I'm curious about libraries, and I know you are from different perspectives, of course, but it would be nice to know yours.
Okay, trying to answer first your inquiry about this, how architecture is kind of reflection of the social. I think we talked about the rooms, and from the postulating also there's another domestic kind of element.
Right.
One of the things that we as a individual overly that it's like we kind of concern about is the kind of privacy that it's people talking about. And usually the people putting the public and private relationship to protect yourself. If you are talking about the privacy, you're kind of protecting yourself from the outside gaze. So that's the kind of first things that you're talking about the privacy. And most of the house or housing today is composed of those fear that your house has to be a private entity that the safe from the outside, which is public.
Right.
Yeah, and that's to me it's reflecting our society, today's society very well. And but it's not naturally we came to that one. No, it was kind of some point of the history that it was kind of became kind of agency to have the everyone individual home. That is one point of the time it was an economic driver because it's the most expensive asset or most expensive acquisition. So
can I add to that? It's also this that in the larger scheme of things, I think it's a very dangerous place that we are actually at, where the negation of public is so strong.
Right.
And not just with COVID. I mean, that's just putting the icing on the cake.
Yeah.
But not even the icing, it's like the stem of the cherry. But it's such a dangerous place because the negation of the other is what is making us insanely unaware of that other. Therefore, that other becomes fearful. And then that leads to everything from communal issues to racial issues to etc. etc. But, and of course, the loss of the commons and things like this. But back to
yeah, so Vishwa said that loss of commons, and then that's exactly the second thing that you're talking about. It's how I'm looking at that sense of loss of common is through the library, or especially the public library, because public library was supposed to support our society from or by providing the knowledge and information that its individual wants. But it's obviously that its public funding is declining, and there's the internet and then accessibility to the information is more easy, so that and it's all the medias, TVs, and etc.
Right.
and of course that's the kind of P2P thing, social media. So you're seemingly having access to the information and the physical space, like a public space, to access to the information and knowledge is negated. So that's kind of, but that's, I still have a faith in that the physical space and public facility which the public library provides. So that's another things that it's the.
I mean, it's interesting how you. I mean, I think you only told me, yeah, that the public library was almost mandated as a basic human right, or the right to access of library was established as a basic human right.
Yes.
You know, earlier in Vancouver, you said that the ruling had
Yes,
kind of taken place.
what was the Vancouver conference got the human rights probably written down.
Right.
And followed by that one, UNESCO has the public library accord describing that it's a how it's, as an individual you have a right to access to all the information.
Right. Right.
Without filtered by any political or religious, and basically that's the individual needs to make their own judgment of doing it.
In that sense, a democratic space.
Yeah, democratic space. So you need to know how you make your own decision. That the group of then only that's democratic society is secured.
Right. And I mean, I know that you'd mentioned the role of the librarian, and I had never really thought about the librarian as that kind of keeper of democracy, you know, in the manner in which you had described, where you had said that, and these are almost mandates within a library structure, I guess, that you would imagine, right? About the idea of this librarian being a completely democratic, unbiased,
non-judgmental.
Non-judgmental entity, because only then she or he is able to open that access of resources to every single individual. And I mean, it's interesting to talk about a structure like public libraries today, because I think the idea of, like you said, the physicality of the library is changing. Its use and its access has changed. Owing to resources, a lot of private libraries have come into play, and the minute anything becomes private means that they have the right to refuse an access of that information and an access of that material to anybody on the basis of biases that come out of, maybe, Vishwa, like you were saying, you know, materials of discrimination, racism, in India, casteism can often be gender-led, you know.
I mean, judgments are made on the basis of objects and clothes, and you know, so as something as trivial as just somebody's physical appearance.
Right.
And
I mean, one
don't
sees that
mean
in
it racial
museums
sense,
too,
but
you know.
kind of going, I don't like what you're wearing, I won't let you in.
Right, right. And it's can boil down to something as minute as maybe you are wearing an outfit that they do not trust, and but also then the dynamics of the baggage of what you're wearing comes from a whole bunch of other information that is fed to that person in some particular manners as well.
It's cultural information that has been filtered through various lenses depending on who you are speaking to.
Right, right. No, and
cultural context you come from as well. So.
Absolutely. And I mean, I mean, it's interesting that you actually were talking about that, because for me, like the public library is almost like seemed like, you know, this institutional space where immediately access was always just something that you never took for granted anyhow, you know. We have a few amazing libraries in Delhi that have existed for a really long time. I mean, maybe hopefully when the world finds its new normal or non-normal, however people would like to describe it. And you can come here, I'd like to take you there. And, in Old Delhi, we have this massive town hall, which, I mean, the books in there have been kind of stuck in a different time zone, it seems. And there's access to all kinds of information, all kinds of languages, which is very difficult to find in libraries today. Mostly private libraries have also started accessing largely English, material. And suddenly that means that your access to the books is by default of that language also restricting access to a whole community of people who might not know the language. And I think what you said kind of really stayed when you said if a library can manage to remain democratic, then a society within it can also remain democratic. But how do we access this idea of the public library in a time where, like you said, the physicality of it becomes more and more questioned because they're either online archives or privatization or, so many other, I mean, just things like COVID that come into play. And so how does one begin to negotiate the access of that library in today's world for us? I mean, for you, how do you see a way for it to adapt in that sense?
I do not kind of know how this COVID kind of situation that it's negating the people to gather or people to come into the space, confined, like a closed space, like a library. It's probably big, but you can't have. But it's anyway that public libraries is not any dense. It cannot be a very dense, densely populated building like a theater or another one. It's quite it's kind of privileged spaces.
Right.
But it's from the point of view of why we just to access the knowledge and the information with the guidance of librarian. Yeah, of course, you could probably sit in a computer and then do it. But I think why space is important is that you could use the spaces and it's kind of open-ended because it's nature of the library, public library. There was a story I think in America, one of the public library, that its kids wanted to, the one kid need to kind of move out of the town because of parents' work.
Mm-hmm.
And he probably couldn't invite any friends or the teachers to the home because there's less space. So ask the librarian, I would like to do something, but I don't have a space. So what librarian is that? Oh yeah, we have a lot of space. You come after the school and you program the program you want. They tell me how you want. We can help you. And the library is always open-ended space that to realize what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes that space is required, and then architecture is the basic that it's like providing the space where otherwise you are outside where you can't do anything.
Right.
You export it. Right now it's also raining. We can't do anything. Our human activity is mostly indoor. And to me, the indoor public space is very important. I mean, indoor public space and yet also open-ended. You could use the way you want.
Right.
Librarian is more, at least in ideology, a facilitator,
right,
rather than being, and the library space becomes that space of the space given to perform the things that get facilitated, whether it's reading a newspaper or whether it's a kid asking to bring in friends and have a gathering. And that is something that I do not think can be replaced by Uncle Google. like Uncle Google may be able to give us a lot of information, and probably Uncle Google knows more than any individual librarian may know.
Right.
But I don't think that Uncle Google can facilitate.
Right.
So, and again, like with that kind of thing, you need to know what you're looking for, without which even Google cannot help you.
Help you.
And
Right.
you get so many rubbish. I mean, today I was trying to look for how to fix an electric meter, and oh my God, everything except what I wanted. You know, so because I didn't have the correct search terms.
Right.
And it doesn't facilitate me to find that information. On the other hand, ideally, if there is a local library, I should be able to go and be like, hey, is there a book on fixing an electrical meter?
Right.
Right.
I do
So
not know that, but
no, I've been very
Goto doesn't trust
with this electrical. No, he doesn't trust me with electronics.
Okay. You trust yourself with the electronic meter.
I trust myself with everything. This is
Perfect. Then we're good.
whole another issue.
Then we don't need to worry about anything. Right. No, but yeah, sorry. Coming back to Uncle Google and Madam Librarian.
I just feel that, you know, it is a place, a space, a place, a person, all of that, that is ideally designed to be facilitating or facilitators,
Right.
and like extremely important spaces. So that's all I have to say.
I mean, to me, that's librarian is like the most important. And then I kind of encounter the people who are thinking about the future of the library, and the librarian and try and then fight against the voice that it's, oh, no more libraries required, because library, like at the end of the day, keeping the book, and now book is all online.
Yeah.
That's like I hear the sound like a voice of the librarian saying that it's no, we are the one that it's kind of center of democratic society, and then we holds the how to access your knowledge. So come their claim is that it's, if you want something, just come to library, speak to us, we will know that it's how you guide you to get to the information and the knowledge you want. So as long as they are kind of performing as a professional, I use the word professional to kind of be a third person.
Right.
Yeah. So
but I was curious to know if I've always felt that every library in its own way kind of has its own agenda. You know, it has its own kind of, maybe unnoticeable in the obvious fashion, but it has its own biases. It has its own kind of structures that it sets up for particular narratives to be running through, or particular narratives to be validated even by the act of them being the institution of the library. And I mean, and sometimes it might be so in a very conscious manner, and sometimes it might be so out of the pure dynamics of logistics, let's just say, because also maintaining a library can, obviously incur costs and logistical details that don't allow for everything to be incorporated in it. So do you think that libraries have a particular agenda in that sense, or?
Can I just say something and then?
Yeah.
Yes, and they must as well. For example, when say that you're looking for something natural history related, you would go to a library that is majority, because no space is large enough to hold all the information at one place.
Absolutely.
And therefore, it's the departmentalization is necessary, where and also for a librarian to become an expert on a specific subject, like otherwise they become like a, my high school librarian where all they ever said was should. They didn't tell us anything other than shh.
Yeah, that's exactly what I remember. We were just
Yeah,
talking, this is the space where
yeah, it's
silence
just like
prevails.
they didn't tell us anything. And on the other hand, if you went to a very specialized library when I'm looking for specific books on household manuals from 18th century, and I go to that particular library and I speak to that librarian, there is like a world of difference. That person knows so much, and I'm like, hold on, let me just talk to you, we'll read the books later, because they already know so much. And that kind of specialization is what makes them also facilitators for that knowledge.
Okay.
So I mean, at least to me, that makes sense somehow.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's different way of looking at it. I think Vishwa told that it's kind of holding the specific knowledge and etc. But if looking at from the neighborhood level or kind of people's level, it's also become a service for the citizen in a neighborhood, in a small region, in the city. And the library also sometimes a point which that it's you come to know that your local city.
Mm-hmm.
But so suppose that Bombay is a big city town, but it's the history of suppose city like a Baroda or a smaller city in Gujarat, like suppose like say Bharuch or any, I don't know where the people come, the audience right now, but it's small, like even not even the B grade town, but it's much smaller town, required to, in order for them to kind of research and then kind of keep their own history of this little town, is that it's all this small public library, if it ever exists.
Right.
Yeah, and then who is supporting those, recording and then research? Is that it's usually that it's the teacher who retired, and the history teacher or librarian that's retired, because they have knowledge and they have access. And all those people to perform, the small local public library is very important. Right. And also that it's for the people living in the area to kind of connect the rest of the world, is that there's a two sides, because you also need to know that it's your significant culture of your own birthplace. Right. At the same time that it's this library connected to the central library of the region. So because always there's a central library in the municipality, and the district level there's a small one that it's always, if you want to get the book online system and you're sending the one central library to the district small library. So there's that this network is very important. And then it's also that if you live in the small village or small town, you are connected to the rest of the world. That connectingness is very important. Otherwise, if you live in the small closed society,
you're isolated from
it. Yes, and then you also kind of feel that you might be discriminated. You do not know. You need to know that the world outside.
Right.
I think this library gives that one.
Great. Unfortunately, we've already hit at 7. And I did want to talk to you guys a lot about the work that you're currently on. But I just want to check with the attendees if they would be up for maybe another 10-15 minutes, and if any of them have any questions, maybe we can address them first, and then we can continue to have a chat and people can choose if they want to stay on or leave, right? So if anyone has any particular questions at this point of time, we'd be happy to take them now. And maybe we'll extend the session just by another 15 minutes or so, because I do want to talk to both Goto and Vishwa about another their year-long project that they're on, which deals with more about the interiors of the domestic space, with a specific focus on the kitchen. Are you guys free? I mean, before I assume about the attendees, you guys are up for that chat. Okay, that's good to know. And maybe we can start talking about that already. And in case any questions pop up, I can direct them to you as we go forward with that conversation. What do you guys think? Is that okay with everyone?
Yeah, we are good.
Okay, perfect.
There's a way to. No. You can put the thumbs on the screen.
Oh, there's a way to, yes. Like you can raise your hand or you can do this.
Yeah.
We'll play with that later. Let's just have
Okay, fine. We'll figure that out as well. But I accept your thumbs up, and yes, one or two people have said sure. So let's continue. Let's talk about the domestic space again, and what you guys have been working on, which is the kitchen, it seems. So Vishwa, whether you left the culinary world or not, the kitchen has come back into your life.
Oh no, I haven't left it. I still love to cook. I just don't do it professionally anymore. I do it for family, friends, and for my own gluttonous belly.
Perfect.
But I have not left the kitchen at all. And in fact, the kitchen is so central to our lives that if you see, it's, I mean, you can see it. It's right. It's where we are sitting right now. We're sitting in our kitchen.
So for those of you who can see the circular view on the left of Vishwa and Goto, it's a massive island table or kitchen, is it?
It's the kitchen, yes. And then on my right is my studio, and on the left is photo studio. So it's the kitchen is really,
it's the central hold of this house.
Heart of our
You want
home.
me to move around a bit?
Sure, that would be really fun. Yeah, maybe we can get a view of.
So that's a Vishwa's side.
That's Vishwa's studio there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's my.
Oh, and that's your studio.
Yes.
Perfect.
So, and then there's a.
And you guys in the center on the kitchen.
Yeah. On the kitchen counter. You can probably see the gas hob and then
yeah I can. It's so interesting how where people today choose to place their kitchens, and I'm sure, I mean, of course this is something that you guys are researching on a lot more right now, because I remember when we guys were constructing our place, my mom's house, quite a few years ago now, and we're a very foodie family ourselves, so it was, we had a smaller land area and we decided to kind of go vertical on it, and so we had rooms for ourselves and a studio and things of that sort, but the most important thing for us was that when people enter the house, the first thing that they should have access to is the kitchen. So our entire ground floor is actually, it's quite, I mean, you walk in and there's an open kitchen out there, and we keep changing the setups on whether the area in front of that kitchen, which is the immediate space you enter into, is that going to be a living room or is that going to be a dining room? And we keep kind of rotating between that. And I know that in your case, clearly the kitchen is where you come together, and and with the studios spaced on either side of it, so it's quite a central conversation.
It's also like the congregational space, so we don't have a living room at all. We don't have like sofas and things, to the bane of my mother, who thinks we don't have any comfortable chairs in the house only. But
Goto, you want to get onto that?
No, she can't have comfortable chairs. But it is the congregational space where we gather for everything from eating to just having, an online session to doing SQW lab. Everything happens around our kitchen table. And it's been very interesting to observe the dynamics of people around this. So if you want to take it away from there, what you would love
no,
to with the
you said it.
dynamics.
You said
Like
it.
you just said, you started off and I was comfortable and I was sitting, and now you're like, yeah, go for it.
No, I will tell that it's not just simply that is placing the kitchen in the center in terms of planning, but it's also that it's like we consciously made the kitchen without having the inside and an outside. Usually when you imagine the open kitchen, there's always behind the counter,
Right.
whether the chef or the person who are cooking is standing, and then it's kind of allocating the space or distinguishing the space of the cooking space. We don't have that one. So we have a circulation around the counter where that it's kind of negating the person who served and the person who served.
The hierarchy, so to speak.
Hierarchy is not there. So that is important, and the kitchen counter and the dining counter also at the same level. So that's also kind of making it relationship flat,
Right.
really flat. So that's kind of things, and then there's nothing obstructing the counter space. It's kind of one flat surface. So that is also
which has led to some very interesting ideas. For example, at one point, I desperately wanted, one of those poker sticks to push.
Food around.
I wanted that just to push plates around because it's just.
I was very curious to know who actually ends up accessing the center of this island, because it's a pretty.
The cat.
Cat.
He's the only one who can get on there unless he.
Yeah, because I was like, oh, that's really big, and it's perfect to look at. You're like, wow, that's so much space to work with. I'm like, but what's happening in the center of this island?
That is chilling.
That's perfect. And so, just to kind of expand from our homes into the work that you're currently researching on, which is also on the domestic kitchen or kitchens in residential spaces largely.
No. So 3 things. One is we're doing a project where we are physically building the idea of a kitchen. So it's not a functional kitchen, but as a pavilion in an outdoor space.
Okay.
In a public space. And then the other project that we've done is looking at how we dine. Like, what are our dining arrangements? Which we've done in collaboration with Bombay Designs.
Right.
And then also looking at Bombay Art Deco kitchens and how they have changed over time. But that's something that we will start now. This is the year, and that's our next book. So
this is the year for that book then.
Yes.
And so you mentioned that these are Art Deco kitchen spaces, and very specifically in Bombay, and I'm assuming by default that would become one particular section of Bombay as well, like the history of one particular section of Bombay.
Yes. Like it's kind of beginning of
mid-1920s.
Yeah, 1920s to 40, 50, 60.
Okay. And do you want to tell us a little bit more about what the research is going to be focusing on in terms of within the domestic? What are the different aspects that you guys are interested in?
One thing we are interested in is that at that period, the participation of the women in construction or designing the house was more significant. That was done, researched by other people. And it appears in a kind of advertisement of that time, kind of geared towards the women. So how to choose your curtain, how to choose this, sofa fabric to home appliances, new be introduced or sometimes could be imported. But it's not just kind of or how you build the robust house. No, women wasn't interested in. Sorry, I'm not kind of.
You've got two women staring at
But
you
it's
right
kind of
now.
generally.
It is generally assumed that
Yeah.
the women were more interested in soft things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then how that is kind of changed the way in which that it's the house or interior space is kind of materialized.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one.
Sorry. Right.
I'm also interested in how, since it's, I'll say occupancy, like since these spaces have been occupied, how have they altered? Like what, for example, we live in an Art Deco house and we've altered it. So
Right.
I'm sure that, almost everyone has altered it in some way. And I'm kind of interested in a timeline that comes from such alterations in materiality. Because it also, in some way, narrates the story of these choices that are made and the kind of role, the shifting of roles or the shifting of how do you
Maybe
say?
even class structures to a certain degree, no?
Class structures, gender structures, all of that. But I'm not interested in kind of looking at very directly, that's the whole another thesis. And but I'm kind of, at least for this book, what I'm interested in seeing is how these material changes that have occurred over this last 70, 80, or even 90 years is reflected. And again, going back to that kind of telling stories through objects, of allowing that space to make narratives through very subtle marks or subtle changes that have happened over these 80, 90 years.
Sorry. And sorry, so when you talk about the idea of objects that have kind of, that reflect the dynamics that are changing, are there any specific changes that, I know you guys you're still in the process of working on your research, and so maybe you don't have very defined parameters just yet, but as an exploration of that subject, what are the aspects that you are then kind of looking at in terms of objects as well? Like I know Goto just mentioned that women were not doing just the soft touches, within that dynamic, and that's kind of an interesting observation also to kind of, and to investigate on. What other aspects of the domestic come under your research essentially?
Yet I need to find out the actual connection, but the kitchen is also that the place. In fact, it's kitchen, and then we also would like to research on the bathroom, but it's probably another one. The practice of hygiene from the kitchen is a one thing, and then it's all largely that's dependent on the women of the house that's control that hygiene. But that's kind of in a family setting. So we would like to look at the kitchen from the, obviously when this Art Deco building was built, it was not geared towards in like a single, the bachelor couple. It was a family home, probably like a different, one could live with the generation of the family. So that kind of, and then still, that was the ideology at that time. But right now, I'm sure that it's many of the the owner of this Art Deco housing, they are old, pass on to the son or any other places, or sold. Like us, that we come here, it's to us, it's large space and using not at all that it's family house. And so we would like to see that shift, but it's also another thing that it's another parameter we would like to see is that it's the practice of the healthy, the meals, that's how it is produced, probably completely negated because the food is available outside restaurant, fancy things that you can eat. You can trust those people in general, unless you are very fussy about this organic, that organic food. But
it's one of those things also. I mean, I sometimes refer to Japan also as a contradiction, to us or the way I grew up. For example, in most new houses in Japan, the kitchen is a sink and a hob. There is no prep space.
It's just everything goes in and then gets washed.
Sink and hob. There's nothing where you can put a chopping board. There's no space. And that's because a lot of the food is pre-prepped. It's not pre-cooked, but it's pre-prepped.
Right.
Especially meat and fish is already prepared. We don't need to kind of open it like that.
And you see those things here as well, where you get your marinated chickens and you get your, you just bring it home and you don't need to prep it anymore. You can just cook it. And those kind of changes. Yeah, I think is also something that we're interested in, but also that how, I'm also interested in household manuals.
Right, okay.
Especially nice Victorian ones that are so nice, beautiful objects.
Have you been collecting any?
No, but I've been very lucky to have access to an amazing archive of household manuals. So
I'm going to come to Bombay soon and be like, give me a peek.
I'll send you some pictures I've taken from books.
Perfect.
The only one that I have is a rubbish copy, which is so bad that they haven't even cut. The guillotine cut is not done properly. I bought it for
but that's nice. So, sorry, but one of the things I was also curious about, like when you talk about Art Deco, kitchens, let's just say, or what the kitchen meant in that household, what was, apart from, of course, the fact that it was a place where food was cooked, but food is often also associated then with the act of rituals, right? And rituals then begin to impact other aspects and other dynamics of social structures. I'm and Goto, I'll go back to kind of the conversation we were having about kitchen spaces, although it's not connected to the Art Deco aspect, but just to kind of give you a sense of what I was thinking about was, like how they've, in a lot of homes all across India, no matter what language or region one belongs to, because caste is so predominant, they have been like, certain entrances, like most kitchens that were in homes, like households in that sense and not apartments because they came up later, had a separate entry at the back. And that's also where, the lady or the gentleman who was supposed to come to cook in the kitchen would be entering from, because it was, now we're very grateful about it, because if you like, oh, there's a back access and now, we can have our own like kitchen gardens and things like that. But I mean, the basis of that, of course, comes from a very clear space of discrimination and caste structure. Similarly, the act of what was cooked outdoors and what was cooked indoors were very defined as well to a certain degree. And of course, I'm certain that there was no outdoor cooking like that was happening in these structures. But are there reflections of such social structures or rituals that ended up becoming a part of society by the architecture of the kitchen as well? I mean, at least up until now, I don't know if
The historical, sorry, if you want to say something.
Yes, I do. So mine is short. So, while we were looking for an apartment in Bombay, we saw one very beautiful Art Deco flat, which was intact. Very rare.
Yeah.
And it still had a squat kitchen.
Oh.
Yeah, without a platform. It still had a squat kitchen. That is one thing I wanted to say. My Nana's house, also in Bombay, in Kalwa Devi, used to have a squat kitchen. Unfortunately, they sold that house when I was 10 or 12 years old, and I don't even know if that building exists anymore. But so you still get a wide insight into the progression of things. That is one thing. The other thing is this thing that and it's not just about caste, it's also about class, and it's a very, very Victorian construct, which not only led to these segregations, not that we didn't have them, we had them ample. But when it comes to kind of this period, a lot of it is influenced by these Victorian values. And that is also the introduction of corridors, because corridor segregated. It is not just, it allowed you to negate or not see something you didn't, or sing or someone you didn't want to see. So there's a very interesting overlap between corridors and kitchens and accesses.
Right, that's good. It's interesting that you mentioned squat kitchens, actually, because I was talking to Goto today and I was telling him how after I finished my education in Bombay and I came back to Delhi, and but I was still kind of working within the journalistic space at that point of time, and so every time I'd go to Bombay, we'd always catch up and I'd be like, okay, so what are the political issues right now? We kind of have those conversations with our friends, and there was a big conversation on Mankurd, which had just kind of started getting resettled.
Sorry, can you say that again? What?
Mankurd. This is kind of on the outskirts of Bombay, and basically it was an entire neighborhood of slums that had been completely cleared, of course, forcefully, and the inhabitants had then been relocated into this area that had been developed specially for them. And I mean, of course, it was that, you take people from a neighborhood and a locality where they literally have to walk to work, and you put them like on the outskirts of the city for, and now they need to travel for 3 hours to get to their work. And, there were, of course, all of those things. But I still remember this so clearly, that one of the biggest grievances that came from the families that had now started occupying those resettlement colonies was from the kitchens. Because over here, they were cooking on the street, and the dynamics of the kitchen was very fluid. They would, a lot of them would use open squat kitchens, and I'm just using that term because I don't know how else to kind of describe it. But they were open squat kitchens, and also because resources are limited, they were often shared, and suddenly you've kind of put them into this skyscraper-like structure and given them tiny closed kitchen areas with slabs on front, and they don't know what to do with this structure. They're just like looking at it baffled. And what started happening is that people started coming outside, like at the entrance of their homes, and started converting that entire passage into a large kitchen by the end of it, because they were used to, a certain process.
Which one?
One in South America where the abandoned building has been taken over. She should see that photo. She might enjoy it a lot.
The big slum?
Yeah, the big...
vertical slum. It's a Venezuela.
Venezuela. Very beautiful.
It's the...
Very, very...
The Chinese... I don't know. It was Chinese or I don't know. It was probably different capital. Invested the building and it's stopped in between, and...
So halfway through construction, it's...
Stopped.
Stopped,
and then it's occupied by the kind of informal set dwellers. and it's like
And
amazing.
then mutated and mutated and mutated into like the most amazing space. So you should
Okay, you have to send that to me at some point because I'm already curious.
I will send it.
Yeah. But it's also so interesting because, you know, I remember when I'd gone to Mankur to kind of see what was happening there, the entire dynamic of that structure and what that architecture could mean had changed, you know, because there were these, and Goto, I'm probably not going to be very accurate with my architectural description of this place, but it was just a gray cement block, you know, with like holes for windows and doors. And that was the structure. It was just like this long thing with, you know, just doors and window holes in them. But suddenly, because these people had started occupying the passages, it became such an open and welcome ground. Like I remember walking through the different floors, and because everyone was cooking outside, you'd end up just talking to everybody, and then they'd collect, and then one person is making like tea on her chula, and the other's like, "Arey, you were doing this, I'm going to make pakoras because I'm your neighbor," and they're standing here, and you know, and suddenly everyone began to congregate, and it became a very different experience as opposed to what
I think the role that kitchens maybe play, I mean, I cannot say this with any theoretical affirmations, but is that it is the space where you notice the dynamic more quickly than anywhere else in the house. And I think whether it's the, you know, slum rehabilitations, and we can, you know, there is so much material, so many people have studied slum rehabilitations in so many different ways, and there are so many people doing such amazing work on slum rehabilitations, and yet we have what we have, and there is ample criticism, and there is more to be said.
Right.
There is more to be done. But coming back to kind of where we're at, I think kitchens is where you begin to experience the change both more quickly than anywhere else in the house, but also more dramatically than anywhere else in the house. So it is the first, you know, whether it is within, for a lack of better words, low cost housing, or it is in kind of Art Deco mansions on Marine Drive, where that relationship between the occupants of the house, and I say that very categorically, not family, but occupants of the house, becomes apparent and felt, and the relationship even with the other, the neighbor, it becomes kind of, in that sense, a kitchen becomes a stage for all that drama to take place.
Right.
Versus like a bedroom, which is extremely individual space, or a living room, which is again, it is where there is like private spaces. How do you say that? Was nice word.
Mm-hmm.
The permission to enter, you know, like there is, you need that permission to enter. On the other hand, the kitchen is a much more dynamic space in that sense as well. So I think that for me is in an interesting aspect of how these dramas, little dramas, play out.
Right. No, that's, I'm looking forward to seeing what this book is going to be like. And
So am I. So am I.
I'm quite curious about it.
We are just starting to look at things, and so let's, me especially, hold horses, not run away with myself.
Yeah, Goto seems already very collected about it. He's like, there is a process to this method and it will happen.
Yes, Zen master.
Well, we'll learn from you on that, Goto, but I'm fairly certain we'll still end up being as erratic and chaotic as we are. But thank you so much for staying on, you both, and the other 4 people actually who are still with us.
Yes.
40 minutes into this. Thanks so much. I know V is there, so we're probably all of us going to have a chat about this slowly. But thank you so much, everyone, for staying on, for listening to all of us. And I hope I will see you on Thursday for a chat with Tenzing Dakpa on his book, The Hotel, which was published by Steidl and is now out. And thank you, Vishwa, and thank you, Goto, for sharing so much with us, from like books to libraries to what domestic spaces mean and individual spaces mean and public spaces mean. And I'm really going to look forward to this book. Hopefully you'll have more than 10 copies for this one and we'll be able to kind of access it. We didn't even get to talking about like the detail with which you prepared your book, but I think this can be the beginning of many other conversations too. Yeah.
Thank you for inviting us to do this.
No.
Thank you. Special shout out to Virangana for introducing us. And thank you for everyone who stayed on. But thank you to everyone who attended in the first place as well.
Yeah, thank you. Have a nice meal. I'm sure it's your dinner time now. And we're also going to go and get down to prepping our meal for tonight. And have a nice evening.
Have a nice evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.